called our anchor program NCA Futures because anchor didn't really land with everybody. And I call it's a social movement with a trajectory. So we're trying to pull in some of the methodologies around creation of a social movement. So if we flip onto the next slide, I'll just describe a bit more about the NCA. So the NCA has only been in being since the 1st of October this year, but we came together as two acute trusts. So Salford Royal, which was outstanding and already had strong integration with Pennine. There's then been a transaction, lots of moving around. So we've been working as a group structure since 2017. But fundamentally for this conversation, it's that the NCA has got a place-based organisational form. So there is nothing in common with the 4 localities that we serve, other than they all happen to be in Greater Manchester and we provide their healthcare services. There's nothing else that covers those 4 localities. So if I flip to the next slide, which kind of is very similar to someone in the pre-reading. So we would say our social value mission is the deliberate and purposeful use of our people to support the economic development of a place and to improve population health and well-being. So it is enabled by the group structure, but it is really delivered in place. We've got the pillars similar to what you've seen in the pack. And over the last 18 months, we've been using a community practice to kind of populate the outcomes that we want from this work, but have been really loose about the means to get there for all the reasons that people have talked about. We tend to go with the willing, we tend to work with programs that are in place, and how do you enable those to be scaled up. But at the end of the day, we have got some metrics that we can share with Trust Board and hold ourselves to account. I'll just pull out in the next slide the main methodology that we use. So we use, sorry, just to the one just before that. We use a community of practice. Oh.
Sorry, slides do that when you try, and I'm just going to navigate back here. Is it this one you're after?
Yes, the community practice one, yep. So we use community practice. So basically that is you bring people together who have got a shared interest or concern. So twice a year we do a community practice. So we've run 3, and we invite our place-based leadership teams, our partners, whoever else. It's real open invite. We get between 60 and 80 people. We've obviously run all of them online. And from that, they then generate the kind of test of change, and they then generate what are our outcomes that we're trying to do. So it's a methodology that we've used a few times, but it works quite well in terms of generation of enthusiasm. So we did one last week on young people in terms of, in particular, around how are we harnessing the ambitions of youth into our workforce. So if we flip to the next slide, this is kind of our governance structure. So I'm a ops person by background, so governance it's not really my thing, but what I tend to say is how are we bringing our organisations to account to help support this work. So I would say that everybody employs people and everyone buys stuff. It's just the lens by which we do that is we're trying to test. So the locality ownership is we use the system boards regardless of what they are. So the health and wellbeing in some places. There is STAT, which is a group in Salford. So we've kind of used the steering group or existing groups to drive and to localise those specific pieces of work. Within the NCA, in terms of group, there is myself, and that's pretty much the resource. And then we've got within each of our care organisations and corporate departments a lead. So I bring them together 2 to 3 times a year. And then what drives underneath it is I do a monthly data insight group where literally we kind of churn through our data to see what is that tunnels and that kind of how we can use that to hold to account. I'm really fortunate that the board's completely embedded and signed up to all this. So we do a twice a year update to the board, but I've got an integrated performance dashboard that pretty much infiltrates the whole organisation. So I do it once a quarter, but it goes into our assurance committee for people, kind of saying if we want to crack workforce, then we really need to look at our widening participation in our pre-employment pipelines. We've got an exec development committee, which looks at our place space in terms of how we're using this to inform ICS developments, economic strategies of place. We've got our sustainability committee that for procurement, and then we've got an EDI committee that is a mixed committee of execs and non-execs, and we kind of use that to kind of influence in terms of how we're really seeing how we're seeing the lens of inequality in that. But fundamentally, we've integrated it within the care, within the assurance processes within the organisation. So it's in our single oversight framework. it's supporting our risks through the BAF, and it's in our annual plan. So back to the point that was made in terms of you do have to have, it's a social movement with trajectories, because there is a few things that we need to measure. Totally get that that's quite vague. So what I thought I'd do is just pull down some examples. So on the next slide, we'll talk through people. So following our first community practice, we came up with some what we would call hairy audacious goals. So we want 60% of our local people to be local by 2025 from a baseline of 45. And in order to do that, we need 1,000 pre-employment learners as part of a 5-year trajectory, and we need 1,000 NHS career ambassadors who can go and do some work with schools. And I've got that broken down by care org now, and we update that quarterly. So the next slide is the slide from the social value framework, which kind of shows that. You probably can't see it, but it goes through each of them in terms of who lives in the locality within the NCA footprint, and then we kind of use that to track improvements. And then I've got one of those for each of the high level objectives. We've got another one for pre-employment learners. And then my final slide is, whenever people ask for me data, I'll always say a story is data with soul. So every time I do a dashboard, I'll always put in a story which helps bring it to life. So the next slide is a story from a pre-employment learner. The reason why I share that is she didn't land particularly well with the organisation, and what we've done is use that story to kind of say that actually we need to establish a formal pipeline. So we've now flipped our processes, that if you are successful in pre-employment course, that might be a Princess Trust, it might be a supported internship, we will put you as job ready and we will automatically move you into a job. And if that means that we need to adapt the hours, we'll do that automatically, because we potentially lost a fantastic colleague because we didn't advertise a job that was flexible. We assumed people would ask for flexibility once they were in post. So we flipped that round. So I always include at least one story when I do the framework. That was what I was going to say, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Donna. Really helpful, and so much in there as well, which is fab.